What started as a routine late-night interview turned into television chaos when Sandra Bullock and Stephen Colbert clashed over Hollywood's treatment of women, leading to the most explosive guest walkout in recent TV history. The Late Show's studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as Sandra Bullock settled into the guest chair, her warm smile masking what would soon become one of the most contentious interviews in late-night television history. The Academy Award-winning actress had arrived to promote her latest thriller, but the conversation would take a dramatically different turn that nobody in the studio could have anticipated. Colbert opened with his trademark sardonic grin, immediately diving into what seemed like harmless banter about Bullock's career longevity in Hollywood. "Sandra, you've been in this business for over 3 decades now. That's impressive staying power for anyone, but especially for a woman in Hollywood. How do you manage to keep getting work when so many of your contemporaries have been, shall we say, retired by the industry?" The question hung in the air with an uncomfortable weight. Bullock's smile faltered slightly, her eyebrows raising as she processed what many viewers would later describe as a backhanded compliment wrapped in a seemingly innocent observation. The audience sensed the shift immediately, their laughter becoming more tentative as they picked up on the underlying tension. "Well, Stephen," Bullock replied, her voice maintaining its professional warmth despite the edge creeping in, "I think the key is to focus on good storytelling rather than worrying about arbitrary expiration dates that some people seem to think exist for women in this industry. Talent doesn't have an age limit, despite what certain attitudes might suggest." Colbert leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to one of mock surprise. "Oh, I wasn't suggesting there was an expiration date. I'm just acknowledging reality. The numbers don't lie. Leading roles for women over 40 are statistically rare. You're one of the lucky ones who managed to beat the odds. That's commendable." The word lucky landed like a slap across the studio. Bullock's posture straightened, her media-trained composure beginning to crack as the implication sank in. Several audience members exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing that this wasn't the typical late-night comedy they'd come to expect. "Lucky?" Bullock repeated, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. "Stephen, I've been acting for 32 years. I've produced films, built a production company, and worked with some of the most talented people in the industry. My success isn't luck. It's the result of hard work, dedication, and yes, talent. The fact that you'd reduce 3 decades of professional achievement to luck is exactly the kind of thinking that perpetuates the problems women face in this industry." The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras capturing every moment of the increasingly heated exchange. Colbert's trademark smirk never wavered, but there was something harder in his eyes now, as if Bullock's pushback had triggered something deeper. "Now hold on," Colbert said, raising his hands in a gesture that appeared conciliatory but carried an undertone of condescension. "I think you're misinterpreting what I'm saying here. I'm actually trying to compliment you. The entertainment industry is a business, Sandra. It's about marketability, demographics, and yes, sometimes that means younger faces get priority. That's not my opinion. That's just how the system works. You've managed to navigate that system better than most, and I think that's worth acknowledging." Bullock's jaw tightened visibly. "Navigate the system? You mean survive despite the system. There's a difference between acknowledging industry realities and perpetuating them, Stephen. When you frame my career as beating odds rather than earning opportunities, you're part of the problem." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Colbert's house band, usually ready with musical stings and transitions, sat motionless. The audience, initially confused by the departure from typical late-night fare, was now completely absorbed in what felt less like an interview and more like a confrontation. Colbert's response came with a laugh that sounded forced even to casual observers. "Part of the problem? Sandra, I host a comedy show. I'm not running a studio or making casting decisions. I'm just a guy trying to have a conversation with a talented actress. Maybe we should talk about your new movie instead of diving into societal critiques. But Bullock wasn't backing down. If anything, Colbert's attempt to deflect seemed to fuel her frustration. You can't separate yourself from the conversation, Stephen. Every time you reduce a woman's achievements to luck or exceptional circumstances, you're reinforcing the idea that success for women in Hollywood is an anomaly rather than a right earned through merit. The host's facade was beginning to crack, his usual quick wit replaced by something more defensive. I never said women don't deserve success. But let's be honest here, Hollywood has always been about youth and beauty, for both men and women. That's not discrimination. That's demographics. Both men and women? Bullock's voice rose for the first time, causing several audience members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Really? Because last I checked, male actors in their 50s and 60s are still landing romantic leads opposite women half their age. When was the last time you saw a 55-year-old woman paired romantically with a 28-year-old man in a major studio film? Colbert's composure was slipping further, his practiced television persona giving way to something rawer and less appealing. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every micro-expression as the interview spiraled into territory that neither guest bookings nor PR teams had prepared for. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, with neither participant willing to back down, and the studio audience finding themselves witnesses to something that felt more real and uncomfortable than anything they'd expected from their night of television entertainment. Colbert shifted in his chair, his usual theatrical gestures becoming more animated and aggressive. "Sandra, you're putting words in my mouth here. I never said the system was fair, but I also didn't create it. I'm just acknowledging reality. And frankly, I find it a bit rich that someone who's made millions of dollars in this supposedly broken system is now lecturing me about it." The personal nature of the attack was unmistakable, and Bullock's expression hardened instantly. The professional mask she'd worn throughout her career was rapidly dissolving, replaced by something far more authentic and dangerous. "Made millions?" she repeated, her voice carrying a new edge that made several crew members look up from their equipment. "You think this is about money? This is about respect, Stephen. This is about not having to justify my existence in an industry I've contributed to for over 3 decades. "Oh, come on," Colbert shot back, his voice rising to match hers. "Let's not pretend this is some noble crusade. You're here promoting a movie, just like every other guest who sits in that chair. The difference is, most of them don't turn a simple interview into a gender politics seminar." The audience was now completely silent, the usual responsive energy of a live taping replaced by an uncomfortable voyeurism. Some viewers were pulling out their phones, sensing they were witnessing something that would be dissected across social media within hours. Bullock leaned forward, her composure cracking further. "A gender politics seminar? Is that what you call it when a woman refuses to smile and nod while you diminish her accomplishments? Maybe that's the problem right there, Stephen. Maybe the fact that you see basic respect as political says more about you than it does about me." The host's laugh was sharp and humorless now. "Basic respect? I invited you on my show. I'm giving you a platform to promote your work. And somehow I'm the villain here? You know what, Sandra? Maybe the problem isn't the industry. Maybe the problem is that some people can't handle honest conversations about how the business actually works." "Honest conversations?" Bullock's voice cracked with incredulity. "There's nothing honest about reducing decades of professional achievement to luck and then acting like you're doing me a favor by acknowledging it. That's not honesty, Stephen. That's condescension dressed up as insight." The studio's atmosphere had become suffocating. Colbert's signature confidence was morphing into something uglier, his attempts at maintaining his comedic persona becoming increasingly strained and unconvincing. "You know what?" Colbert said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that seemed to surprise even him. "Maybe I was wrong about the luck thing. Maybe your longevity in Hollywood has less to do with luck and more to do with being willing to play the game. Some people adapt, some people complain. Guess we know which category you fall into now. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The implication was clear, and the audience's collective intake of breath was audible. Bullock's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and finally, a cold fury that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "Play the game?" she repeated slowly, her voice now dangerously quiet. "What exactly are you implying, Stephen? Because if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, we're about to have a very different kind of conversation." Colbert seemed to realize he'd crossed a line, but rather than retreat, he doubled down with the desperation of someone who'd lost control of the situation. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Hollywood is a business based on relationships, networking, and yes, sometimes compromise. Everyone who succeeds here understands that." The studio fell into a silence so complete that the mechanical whir of cameras seemed deafening. Bullock sat perfectly still for a moment, her eyes never leaving Colbert's face as she processed the full weight of his insinuation. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled but trembling with barely contained rage. "Stephen, I want you to be very careful about your next words, because what you just suggested crosses every line of professional decency. And if you think I'm going to sit here and let you imply that my career success is based on anything other than my work, you are gravely mistaken." Colbert's face had gone pale, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. The studio lights seemed harsher now, exposing every bead of sweat on his forehead as he realized the gravity of what he'd unleashed. "Look, I didn't mean to suggest—" "Oh, you meant exactly what you said," Bullock cut him off sharply, her composure finally shattering completely. "You meant to diminish me, to reduce my 3 decades of work to some kind of transactional arrangement. You meant to put me in my place because I had the audacity to challenge your casual sexism." The audience was frozen, caught between fascination and horror, as they watched one of America's sweethearts transform before their eyes. This wasn't the Sandra Bullock they knew from romantic comedies and award shows. This was a woman who had been pushed too far by a host who had catastrophically misjudged his target. Colbert attempted damage control, his voice cracking slightly. "Sandra, you're twisting my words. I was talking about the industry in general terms. Everyone in Hollywood has to navigate—" "Navigate?" Bullock's voice rose to a level that made the sound engineers scramble for their controls. "Is that your euphemism for what you think I've had to do? Let me be crystal clear, Stephen. I have never, and I mean never, compromised my integrity for a role. The fact that your mind immediately went there says everything about you and nothing about me." The host's attempts at maintaining his television persona were crumbling in real time. His usual quick wit had abandoned him, leaving him exposed and scrambling. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. You're being deliberately obtuse." "Obtuse?" Bullock laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm being obtuse for refusing to accept your thinly veiled suggestion that successful women in Hollywood must have slept their way to the top? That's your definition of obtuse?" The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most explosive interview in late-night television history. Social media was already erupting as viewers shared clips and reactions in real time, the hashtag trending within minutes. Colbert's desperation was now visible to everyone in the studio. "You're putting words in my mouth that I never said. I'm talking about networking, about relationships, about what women have to do to succeed that men don't," Bullock interrupted again, her anger now fully unleashed. "Because that's what you're really saying, isn't it? That my success couldn't possibly be based on merit alone? That somewhere along the way, I must have done something that you wouldn't expect from a male actor." The silence that followed was deafening. Colbert opened his mouth several times, but no words came. The audience sat transfixed, many of them recording on their phones, sensing they were witnessing television history in the making. Bullock stood up abruptly, her movement so sudden that several crew members jumped. "You know what, Stephen? I've spent 32 years in this industry dealing with men like you. Men who smile to your face and then question whether you really earned your place at the table. Men who think they're being clever with their little insinuations and their backhanded compliments." Colbert remained seated, but his body language screamed panic. "Sandra, please, let's just take a breath here. This has gotten way out of hand." "Out of hand?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "No, what's out of hand is your behavior. What's out of hand is your assumption that you could sit there and systematically tear down my career achievements while hiding behind the pretense of casual conversation." The host made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "I think maybe we should go to commercial and—" "We're not going to commercial," Bullock snapped, her eyes blazing. "We're going to finish this conversation. You started this, Stephen. You decided to turn what should have been a simple interview into an interrogation of my worthiness to exist in this industry." The studio was now electric with tension, every person present aware they were witnessing something unprecedented. Colbert's usual confidence had evaporated entirely, replaced by the dawning realization that he had not only lost control of the interview, but had potentially destroyed his own reputation in the process. Bullock took a step closer to his desk, her presence commanding the entire studio. "You want to know what's really lucky, Stephen? It's lucky that I've built a career strong enough to survive encounters with people like you. It's lucky that I don't need your approval or your platform to validate my worth." Colbert made one final, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Sandra, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Maybe we can—" "There's no misunderstanding," she cut him off with surgical precision. "You made your position clear. You think my success is either luck or compromise, and when I challenged that narrative, you doubled down instead of examining your own bias. That's not a misunderstanding, Stephen. That's a character reveal." The audience was completely silent now, some visibly uncomfortable, others leaning forward in fascination. The energy in the room had shifted entirely to Bullock, who commanded every eye and ear in the studio with an authority that made Colbert look small and diminished behind his desk. "You know what the real tragedy is here?" Bullock continued, her voice carrying across the silent studio. "You had an opportunity tonight to have a real conversation with someone who's been in this industry longer than some of your viewers have been alive. Instead, you chose to use your platform to perpetuate the exact attitudes that make this business harder for women." Colbert's hands were visibly shaking now as he gripped the edge of his desk. "I never intended—" "Your intentions don't matter," Bullock interrupted, her voice rising with finality. "Your impact does. And your impact tonight has been to show everyone exactly who you are when someone doesn't play along with your script." The cameras captured every moment as Bullock moved toward the guest entrance, her exit as commanding as her presence had been throughout the confrontation. But she wasn't finished. She turned back to face Colbert one final time, the studio lights, catching the steel in her expression. "I've been doing this for 32 years, Stephen. I've worked with legends, I've won awards, I've built a production company, and I've earned every single opportunity through talent and hard work. If you can't recognize that, without reducing it to luck or insinuation, then that's your limitation, not mine." Colbert sat frozen, his usual quick wit completely abandoned. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before he managed to stammer. "Sandra, please, let's just—" "We're done here," she declared with finality that left no room for negotiation. "And just so we're clear, this isn't about sensitivity or political correctness. This is about basic human decency, something you seem to have forgotten in your quest to be provocative." The studio erupted in whispers as Bullock strode toward the exit, her heels clicking against the floor with decisive authority. Several audience members began applauding, a sound that started tentatively but grew stronger as more people joined in, creating a wave of support that followed her departure. Colbert remained at his desk, his face flushed and his usual composure completely shattered. He looked toward his producers in the wings, but found no salvation there. The damage was done, and everyone in the studio knew it. "Well," he said weakly into his microphone, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause for Bullock's exit. "I guess we'll be right back after this break." But there would be no recovery from this moment. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out in animated discussion, the full scope of the disaster was already becoming clear. Within hours, clips of the confrontation would dominate social media, with overwhelming support for Bullock and harsh criticism for Colbert's behavior. The incident sparked immediate conversations about respect, professionalism, and the treatment of women in entertainment. Industry colleagues rallied around Bullock, praising her for standing up to casual sexism and refusing to accept diminished expectations. By morning, Colbert's ratings had plummeted, sponsors were reconsidering their partnerships, and media critics were calling it one of the most spectacular self-destructions in late-night television history. The confrontation had exposed something ugly beneath his comedic persona, something that audiences found difficult to forget or forgive. Sandra Bullock, meanwhile, had reminded everyone why she remained one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Not through luck or compromise, but through talent, dignity, and the courage to demand the respect she had earned through decades of exceptional work.